for joining us for today's MLC Masterclass series focused on transforming factories of the future with 5G and data. My name is Lauren Bissett, and I'm a part of the Manufacturing Leadership Council team here at the NAM. And now, let me introduce today's moderator, MLC's co-founder, vice president, and an executive director, Mr. David Brosell. David, I turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Lauren, and welcome everyone to our masterclass webinar for today on 5G technology, a very important technology that we here at the Manufacturing Leadership Council consider to be a transformative technology. And we'll talk over the next hour about why that's so and what the implications are for manufacturing. So right now, I'll take a few moments to set the stage for our discussion about 5G and how it will advance manufacturing. Most technologies have long incubation periods and all ride an adoption curve. Technologies are invented at a point in time or over a period of time, but then it takes many years before they mature to the point that widespread adoption occurs. Artificial intelligence is a case in point. Introduced as a concept in the mid-1950s by IBM scientist John McCarthy, AI had a growth spurt in the 1980s, but then hit a wall. Today, AI is still at a relatively early stage of adoption, but manufacturers' intentions for the technology are very strong. In the Manufacturing Leadership Council's latest Transformative Technology Survey, results of which were published in October, nearly 35% of respondents said their companies have already invested in AI technology in a variety of applications. But over the next 2 years, more than 46% said they will invest or consider investing in the technology. Cellular communications technology like 5G is following a similar path. First surfacing about 50 years ago when Motorola engineer Martin Cooper made what is believed to be the first cellular call from New York City, cellular technology has undergone multiple generations of development and maturity. In 1991, 2G technology debuted, offering digital voice, text messaging, and dial-up capabilities. By 1998, 3G supported email, photos, and web applications. And around 2009, 4G began supporting streaming video. Now 5G is upon us. The MLC research I cited about AI also shows where manufacturers currently stand with 5G adoption. As of last fall, 26% of respondents to our survey said they had already invested in 5G. But over the next 2 years, 51% expect to either invest or are considering investing in the technology. The reasons for this broader adoption intention are becoming increasingly clear. In terms of speed, 5G networks can peak at a rate that is about 20 times higher than that of 4G networks. With regard to latency, 5G networks can send data round trip in less than 10 milliseconds. And in terms of capacity, 5G networks can capture data from hundreds of thousands of sensors per square mile. To paint a more detailed picture of where the manufacturing industry stands with 5G and how it is and will be used, I'm pleased to introduce analyst Reed Paquin from IDC Manufacturing Insights, a long-term partner of MLC. Reed, the floor is yours.
Thanks, David, and thanks everyone for joining us today, listening in. As David said, my name's Reed Paquin. I'm a research analyst at IDC as part of the IDC Manufacturing Insights group. So obviously focusing on the manufacturing vertical, and just wanted to share some of the research results that we have on this topic. And I think the main theme that I view this in is around sort of data and connectivity initiatives and you know, why manufacturers are sort of focusing on these priorities. And I think just to start it off, if we look at some of the research I wanted to highlight, really, I think it's important to set the stage and understand sort of a lot of the drivers that are going on in the industry. Obviously, everyone's talking about, the impact of COVID, but there's a lot of things that are driving this interest in connectivity and 5G. So there's, unanticipated events, constant disruption from things like COVID-19, but also there's just the customer market expectations for more personalized products, services, things like that. I really think it's driving change and creating the opportunity for a company to transform how its operations can stay better aligned with markets. And where IDC is essentially calling it operational resiliency. And I think if you think, just given the rapid pace of change that's been occurring within manufacturing, the one thing that we've consistently seen in the research that we've been doing is manufacturers that made investments in digital technology prior, specific to COVID, but even before this, are better prepared to respond and adapt. And as you can see here, the industry's at varying stages in their digital transformation efforts, but it's pretty clear the importance of having this digital first strategy is really becoming, embraced across the industry. I mean, you can see it's, a little under a quarter of the manufacturers realized this prior, but it's about 2% for some reason think that they don't need to take this digital first approach. But I think that's really a key point to keep in mind, this importance on becoming digital. And if we look at the next data point that I just wanted to go over, I think the reason behind this really can be traced back to the importance of data. Manufacturers obviously know that data is essential to become more efficient, resilient, and just competitive. So the results here are from a recent future of operations study that we did that focuses on, this specific slide focuses on technology investment priorities over the next 5 years. And if I look at some of the things that mentioned, I mean, David, you mentioned at the top AI, and we see the same trend. The focus on AI is extremely high. It's the top technology listed here. So manufacturers recognize the impacts, but if I could boil this slide into 2 points, I think there's 2 sort of focus areas. First, connectivity. So investments in IoT, edge computing, wireless. And second is around maximizing the value of data. And that's investments in analytics, AI, machine learning, those types of things. Because essentially, successful manufacturers want to create, gather, and analyze critical data throughout their operations to become more aware of changes, how to change, and really improve the decision-making process. I think that's what it's all about. However, as the amount of data that's now available has just exploded, turning that data into actionable insights, it's really become even more of a challenge. I mean, manufacturers tend to struggle with the amount of data they have currently. As more and more gets connected, it's just going to become a bigger issue. So while manufacturers realize that sort of the data-driven decision-making really is essential to remain competitive, they can often be held back by their network infrastructure to really deal with the extra demands from bandwidth, speed, and low latency requirements for a lot of these newer technology investment areas. And I think that's why you see so many manufacturers realize that sort of the wireless connectivity piece is so critical to achieving operational excellence and resiliency. And the next area just to talk about, we think about this usually in the terms of IoT, and the focus on data and connectivity is really, I think, why 5G has started to become such a topic of interest across the industry. So one of the IoT studies that we did and shows some of the results on this chart. Basically, it talks about from an IoT standpoint, what are your plans for starting to incorporate 5G into these initiatives? And the results we have is, I would say, kind of similar to what David mentioned. Around 16% have already started to use it, but there's 35% or so are sort of in that consideration phase. And I think that's a key point, is that 5G, it's part of an ongoing evolution from a connectivity technology standpoint. and the deployment of 5G speed, latency, and connection attributes. It's really going to help future-proof manufacturing operations. But I think it's also important to keep in mind that it's technology that's still developing. You need to have patience. Being able to balance sort of a short and a long-term view is really the kind of mindset that needs to be taken when it comes to 5G spending and planning. But while it's in still the early stages of adoption, I also think how are manufacturers thinking about 5G is important to consider, and that's really the question that we asked in this IoT survey, and the next chart sort of focuses on that, which you can see here. I think the one surprising thing that stood out to me looking at this is that while latency is often the area that is focused on a lot and talks about a lot when it comes to the impact of 5G from a marketing side of things, the results of the survey show that it's relatively lower. It's actually the impact from a data perspective in enabling new use cases that manufacturers think will be the most appealing. And while there are definitely completely new use cases and the potential to change sort of business models when it comes to 5G, I would also include new ways of maximizing current use cases in that bucket. Things like mobile robotics in production, autonomous vehicles, augmented reality. These are all applications that place a high demand on manufacturing networks, and it's pretty easy to hit sort of the limits there. And I think that's another thing to keep in mind is that 5G can allow a manufacturer to really extend the usage of a lot of the technology that's already in place. So I'd like to think of this in terms of that data piece. I think that's really the most essential thing to keep in mind here, and how can data be better used. So with some of that more tactical thinking, I guess you could say, around 5G covered, the next chart that I wanted to highlight was some of the more overall thinking or goals that the industry has when it comes to 5G. But I also wanted to split it up to try to highlight some differences that we're seeing depending on the type of manufacturer that you are. And obviously an easy comparison to make is process versus discrete. So you can see here there's really a few key areas where there's a difference. On the discrete side, they're really thinking more in terms about capabilities from the product side of things, or enabling new capabilities for customers. And I think an example would be sort of automotive in what can be done in the vehicles themselves. Whereas on the process manufacturing side, it's really about thinking about how can we enable new capabilities for organization. And really, I think about that more, it's focused on sort of factory and operations. And just because of, these types of manufacturers tend to be more asset intensive, I think that's why that's a bigger focus there. But I think it's an important thing to highlight, and that's why I just wanted to show it that there are variations from a priority standpoint depending on the type of manufacturer. And since the fact that 5G really is still developing, and it's an area where companies are just starting to think, I think most companies are sort of in that planning phase. One thing I wanted to show next was sort of just drivers that we're seeing is the things pushing 5G interest, and then also some considerations to keep in mind just from manufacturers that we've spoken with that sort of have already taken some of these actions in place. I think the one thing to focus on that I hear more and more is the automation piece. Automation is obviously something that's been a focus in manufacturing for a long time, but we expect it just to continue to expand in warehouses, assembly, packaging. But 5G can help provide faster data transmission, allowing for better optimization of production and operations. So I think that the tie-in of greater use of automation in 5G is important to keep in mind. Another area is around sort of visual-based inspection, visual systems. And this is an area we're seeing a pretty sharp increase in interest from a use case standpoint. I think the importance of product quality and trying to improve scrap, waste, rework are all things that are perfect fits for a lot of the visual-based inspection areas, and the tie-in with 5G makes it sort of an ideal candidate. There's a lot of analysis that has to be done on still or moving images, and being able to combine edge computing with 5G will allow for better near real-time analysis to do a better job dealing with quality issues that may come up. But some of these other priorities here, I think we may touch upon them in the panel discussion, so I don't want to dive too deep in them now. I think just quickly to look at some of the considerations. I think one of the key points to keep in mind that's been mentioned is that 5G, there are benefits, but it's still emerging. There's still advancements that have to take place. And I think not only that, if we think about more of the advanced use cases when it comes to 5G, there's also development and scalability pieces that have to develop from an ancillary side of things. So technologies like AI, augmented reality, edge computing, robotics, as those technologies need to mature as well to make sort of the combination with 5G apply even better. I think on sort of the sunk cost side of things, it's important to realize that manufacturers aren't just going to rip and replace what they have. The reality is that manufacturers have to figure out how can they start incorporating 5G for specific use cases now. I think that's really the reality for most manufacturers, just given the legacy nature of a lot of operations in sort of facilities. Also, obviously, I think this is critical from focusing on sort of use cases or outcomes. Don't invest in 5G just to say that you're doing it. Make sure that the investments have a means to an end. You need to really drive tangible outcomes. I think that's really important, especially if you want to get a lot of these 5G investments to expand more across an enterprise. Focusing on the right use case is really important. I think related to that are sort of the next point around sort of bespoke off-the-shelf deployments. As the technology continues to mature, as more and more manufacturers use this, the amount of use cases that become more plug and play will increase. There'll still be some more niche ones that take more degrees of customization or configuration. But I think if you compare it to sort of the IoT space, that's sort of I think an apt comparison. If you went back 5-6 years, it was still in its early stages, and now it's much easier to get out of that pilot or POC purgatory that so many run into. So I think that's an important piece. And then the last one, just to touch on, 5G is primed to transform manufacturing, but time's going to be required. I think there's a lot of early investments going on now, and it's going to serve as sort of an innovation platform, and manufacturers will develop new use cases that apply. But I think it's important to balance the short and the long term. Focusing on use cases that can deliver value now while also building out to some of those more long-term ones is really going to be essential. So that at a high level is what I wanted to go over. I think that is my last slide. The last is just around sort of the contact info. But that's just one I want to highlight from some of our recent research. David, I'll turn it back over to you from the panel side of things.
Yeah, thanks very much, Reed. Very interesting data points. One of the takeaways I'm getting from them, from what you said, is that manufacturers are really looking at this in terms of identifying opportunities with this technology that perhaps they don't have right now, which tells me their imaginations have been stimulated by this technology. So very, very interesting. So let's get into our panel discussion now. And please allow me to introduce Anisha Biggers, who is the Managing Director, Intelligent Automation Advisory at NTT Data, and Samir Joshi, who is the Senior Director of Manufacturing Industry Solutions and Strategy at NTT Data. NTT Data is a member of the Manufacturing Leadership Council. So welcome. Looking forward to the discussion today. And to pick up on what Reed was saying, do you all believe that 5G represents a paradigm shift in cellular networking technology? It's not just another chapter in the same book with regard to cellular technology. It's actually represents an inflection point with what we're able to do with the technology. And if so, are there new business models, for example, back to that imagination point I mentioned, that may emerge in the manufacturing industry as a result of 5G? Anisha, would you like to take this first?
Yes, thank you, David. And I completely agree. Yes, I do think that 5G does represent a paradigm shift. It is a transformational technology, as you've been mentioning, and I think Simi, my colleague, can actually talk about the technology in itself. But the impact that it would have on the business models is something that I did want to touch upon, because I think this is one of the many technologies that have come up in the past decade, and it is not the last one. There are going to be transformative technologies coming out with the way the technology is advancing in the industry. I think what we need to focus on from a business perspective is how do we monetize 5G as a technology now that it is available and out there in the market. And I think from a business standpoint, there are three imperatives. There are three main drivers for any business for such an investment. How do you leverage 5G to improve your revenue or grow your revenue? How are you optimizing cost of business leveraging 5G, or how can you reduce risk? I think this is coming back to one of the points that Reid made is we can't just identify use cases and opportunities and apply them. There needs to be a North Star. Why do we invest in 5G? What is the value that we're getting out of it? So I think answering those questions in terms of how do we apply and why do we apply 5G and why is it relevant to our business is going to be very important, which in the next step will change how we align our business models with this technology.
Thank you very much for that business perspective. Samir, do you agree with those points? Are there other factors that manufacturing operational executives should focus on in addition to what Anisha was talking about? Perhaps in terms of efficiency, perhaps in terms of productivity, perhaps in terms of speed of their operations?
Yeah, thanks, David. Yeah, first of all, 5G is not simply a technical upgrade from 4G. It's clearly a paradigm shift in the cellular network technology. Although the fact remains that although we talk of 5G as the next disruption and it's going to be built on 4G infrastructure, but companies will increasingly create new and densified network infra, and as well as a very high computational power. In the context of manufacturing industry now, 5G represents a massive leap forward. David, you've got very important points, and how the manufacturers are leveraging. Let's very quickly take a step back and see the massive impact it's bringing. So high bandwidth, when Anisha talked about, so it's 4G could give 200 megabit per second on a good day. 5G is bringing in a range of 1 gigabit to 10 gigabit. Talk of ultra low latency, right? So again, the reliability that it's bringing in. It's an improvement from 20 millisecond to less than a millisecond. Again, bringing dense connections, 100-fold increase of supported devices from the earlier 4G. Now it's close to about 1 million devices per square kilometer. So, and the last but not the least is energy efficiency, that one gets from the 5G disruption. It's clearly significant improvement in the entire energy efficiency. So these are, to my mind, clearly the drivers where manufacturing is playing a role when it comes to the operational effectiveness, the scalability, all the use cases that we are seeing. And I think we'll obviously, I saw Reid talking about those at a high level. But let me take another example, because you talked about business models. Servitization has taken off. So it was, again, as we all viewed in past, just a matter of visualization. People are looking at a POC, but now there are scenarios where companies are creating model for consumption-based billing, field services, the value-added digital services, leveraging the analytics and data monetization, creating a completely new service line for the customer. So multiple areas, and yes, it's a paradigm shift.
Yeah, seems like we have agreement on that point.
Well, yeah, one thing I wanted to add on that was just mentioned there, David, and Samir, you just talked about sort of the service piece, and I think that's really an important aspect. I don't have the chart in this deck, but another, question we asked was around sort of business models and how future-proof do you think your business model is. In manufacturers, it was less than 20% thought they were, and I think that's why there's such a big shift trying to move more into services, and it's going to be key, especially as when it comes to helping manufacturers do a better job, differentiate from competitors. I think that's really a key piece, and being able to offer products and services is essential to doing that.
Yeah, and the point you made earlier about the data, Reed.
Yeah.
I mean, our surveys indicate that over the next several years, manufacturers are expecting up to a 500% increase in the data volumes.
Mm-hmm.
So once they get into some of this stuff, they're going to discover things they never thought about.
Yep. Yep.
And there could be lots of opportunities there. So we've talked a lot. We have total agreement on the fact that this is a turn on the road, so to speak. We're climbing a new hill here. And we've talked a lot about potential benefits. Now, manufacturers know well that implementing these technologies is never a walk in the park. There's always unexpected things. So what do you see as some of the challenges in acquiring, implementing, and optimizing this technology once you bring it into your factory or plant? And then I'll ask a second question about some specific technologies. But let's focus on what do you think some of the key technologies are here. Samir, you want to go first on that one? Then we'll pass it around.
Very valid point here, David. Essentially, while we all agree on the 5G benefits and the way companies are rapidly into adoption, but the challenges cannot be ignored, right? Broadly speaking, you can bring in multiple areas, but broadly speaking, I would like to categorize in two parts. So one is the technology challenge, the other is the financial challenge. Now, manufacturers, historically are used to hardwired factory systems with all cables in which, neither reliability nor security was a significant concern. Now, although 5G promises high level of reliability, but that said, the whole open connectivity to cloud can cause significant security concerns. So that's one of the technology challenge. The other aspect is the way rapid advancements we have seen from the 2G to 3G to 4G to now the 5th generation, companies and manufacturers are also a bit skeptical. What's the next technology disruption and how soon it's going to happen? So do I really invest? Do I really get that return on investment before this becomes obsolete? That's another challenge companies are facing. And obviously that brings us to the bigger challenge, which is financial aspect. So the most critical factor to implement 5G or any industry 4.0 technologies has been often the ROI. Put bluntly, will a company's investment in 5G create a sufficient value for the manufacturer to move forward? So those are the questions, right? Again, the decision to finally implement 5G in the manufacturing operations will broadly revolve around the cost, efficiency, and productivity, right? So I just remember one example there. On a fast-paced assembly line, even microseconds of latency can cause costly disruptions for the manufacturer. And I'm thinking of a aircraft engine manufacturer. With the introduction of 5G technologies, the whole industrial robotics would be set up to communicate more reliably. The whole tethered and untethered robots could be also controlled, monitored, reconfigured. So, while we look at the challenges part, I would also like to bring in what and how these could be overcome if there are any clear defined use cases. And again, like Reed's point, take smaller steps, make it happen.
Reed, before I ask this question of you, audience, you can put any questions or comments in this discussion in the chat box at any time. We'll take it toward the end when we have Q&A with you. So don't hesitate to wait. You can do it right away. But Reed, I want to pick up on something Samir said about thinking about the technology and the ROI and what it takes to put it in and all that. Is 6G around the corner? Should manufacturers wait?
Well, I think that's the big issue, is uncertainty, and then just factoring in, I would say manufacturing is a bit more risk averse, and they would prefer to be more of a fast follower than a leader when it comes to a lot of this technology. But I think what's going to be key is manufacturers starting to make this shift. The benefits, there are use cases and benefits that can be delivered today. There's a separate study that we have around sort of comparing digital and non-digital manufacturers. And I think the big point that stands out is the gap increases over time in performance. So the longer you wait, the further behind you're going to fall from your peers that are doing these things. And I think so I mentioned a few challenges and a few sort of benefits or use case areas, but I think a big one, Samir, you sort of touched upon it. I think if we think from a talent skills perspective, I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges. To achieve these outcomes, you need both industry or sort of business expertise, but also technological expertise. And manufacturers, that's especially when it comes to something like 5G, it's something that there's not a lot of within a manufacturing organization. So it's really the successful manufacturers are looking for partners that can bring in that technological expertise to start achieving those use cases. I think that's an important thing to keep in mind as well.
Yeah, so let's pick up on the second part of this question, and that is, as we've seen in our studies, that I'm sure you've seen in yours, Rita, and I'm sure Samir and Anisha know, this is not the only technology that manufacturers are looking at as part of their 4.0 journeys. There's a lot of them. Data analytics, AR, VR, collaborative and mobile robots, automated guided vehicles. So they're also in parallel investing in these technologies for a lot of the same benefits that we're talking about from a business point of view. But is 5G fundamental to making these other investments reach their potential? That's what I really like to get at here. Who'd like to take that one? Samir, Anisha?
I just want to add, sorry.
Go ahead, Anisha.
Just wanted to add it. I think we should consider 5G as an augmenting technology or an accelerator to enhance the work that we're already doing with AR, right? I don't think it's one versus the other, or there is a kind of a dependency, because I think you asked the right question. 5G is right now, are we already talking about 6G? So the focus shouldn't be, our strategy or business model shouldn't be around a technology. It should be, what is it that we're trying to achieve, and then align these technologies to your strategy. I think that is the approach that you want to take. And coming back to, I think Reid made a point on skill sets. I think this is why it's not just important to have the right skill set from a technology perspective for somebody to be able to say, you know what, regardless of 5G, which is still work in progress, we do need to invest in AR, VR because of field services, or we do need to enhance our AGVs because, factory floor operations. But I think there's another skill set that is needed. There is technology, but there is also data. Now that we're talking about near-time, real-time data that we're collecting, you already mentioned 500% uptake in the kind of data that we are going to get. It is very important now to start discussing what kind of data, what's the gap? What is the data that already exists in our systems? Because initially the conversation was up till 4G, what is the data that we have within our systems versus what are the data that we can collect from outside of our systems, which is weather patterns, satellite data, whatnot. I think the conversation 5G is going to be different. What do we have right now? What do we have outside the systems? But what kind of data can we produce? Because now we have this technology, which in turn should impact the kind of products that are coming out from an IoT perspective.
Okay, so let's drill down a little bit on something we've been just skirting around, and that's kind of the use cases that we're seeing right now. Our studies have shown, and I'm sure the same with Reid, that manufacturers expect 5G to be important for a range of functions and activities. We've seen applications around analyzing sensor data from equipment for monitoring and maintenance purposes. facility security, warehousing and logistics, and inventory tracking. Do you consider these types of applications to be kind of the low-hanging fruit now, where the most pain points are for manufacturers, or not, or do you see this as something else? Samir, would you like to start with that one?
Right, David. Essentially, I would say, and again, maybe talking of some numbers I picked up while listening to a lot of these amazing sessions. So, the entire gamut of use cases, when we talk of the Industry 4.0 segment, is basically expected to account for sales of about 22 million 5G IoT units by 2030. And most of these applications would be related to smart manufacturing, covering the end-to-end supply chain. So that said, there are these areas like asset monitoring and maintenance, which are clearly, the low-hanging fruits, which are clearly showing the ROI, the production efficiencies. But let's look at broadly, the 4 or 5 major areas where the advancements are happening. So data analytics to predict the breakdown and downtime, that's already in this. As I think Reed mentioned earlier, there are scenarios where POCs have converted into the real business problem solving. So projects are being kicked off, companies are harnessing the benefits. Look at the whole IT/OT integration, and this is again much wider than limited to the shop floor, because it's eventually solving the complex business problems. So that's another area we could see happening in a big way. Post-pandemic supply chain resiliency is the hot topic everywhere. All manufacturers are looking at, how do I improve my traceability? How do I really get the real-time or near real-time inventory status? So that has, because of 5G potential to support the mobile devices at scale, it's possible. It's possible to track a company's entire supply chain with greater accuracy. So these are 3 or 4 major areas. I would like to talk about process automation, which is now, I would say, still early stages, but some of the mission critical companies, like we saw in the earlier presentation, if we have to segregate the process manufacturers, the discrete manufacturers, and the automotives of the world, one of the aircraft engine manufacturer, again, one of my favorite, has been experimenting with 5G based production technology. They pilot tested its application on Blisk. It's a blade integrated, it's a high-tech component that are used for jet engines. Pretty complex, require utmost accuracy to produce, and normal production time is 3 to 4 months. When they deployed 5G and they did a POC, they realized 75% production efficiency being achieved. So it's a clear, low-hanging fruit out there, and it's a no-brainer that they're going ahead with the entire project. So, David, I think some of these areas, to my mind, are going to be quick low-hanging fruits. They're going to be there and clearly defined.
Yeah, and they're very important because, to your earlier point, the manufacturers really have to demonstrate the ROI, and it can't be 10 years from now. It has to be relatively soon. Anisha, Reed, any comment on the low-hanging fruit question? And maybe I could just throw in a second question there. If you do agree that these kind of application areas are the targets right now for a lot of companies, looking forward, are there other use cases that you're expecting to emerge once manufacturers move up that curve?
Yeah, so at least for my thoughts, I would add worker safety as one of those to this area as well. I think that's one that manufacturers that I've been speaking with have been focusing on. And again, from a low-hanging fruit perspective, I think these are use cases that it's pretty clear ways to drive ROI. It's pretty standard in how you can do that. I also think, related to the question before, I think the expanded usage from a robotic side of things is also important, especially as sort of talent and labor becomes more and more of an issue. 5G can help from just robotic costs in general by enabling the offload of compute to cloud and network edge. And as the complexity of tasks that robots can do increases, it will allow cobots, AGVs to be used more, and just the fact that 5G is wireless will allow for, a greater area for these, that technology to apply. So I would say that's another area that comes to mind. From
Yeah.
the long-term side of things, I think thinking back to that discrete versus process slide, I think thinking about new capabilities from a product or services to an end customer would be more of the long-term thinking.
Yeah. Anisha, any comment on this one?
Yeah, I mean, I do think there's so much potential because we're talking about hyperconnectivity within a specific ecosystem. And with 5G, I think the discussions are going to be, this is what our technology stack is. These are the operating technologies. These are the physical network technologies. How do we now start connecting? And how do we generate value of the investments that we've already made? And how do we enhance it? I think that would be very interesting to see how companies, how clients are applying 5G and how they're monetizing it.
Yeah, very interesting. One of the takeaways I'm getting from all of this from you all is at the end of the day, this technology is going to speed up the pace of business.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have to be able to move faster to be competitive and remain competitive. And we think things are moving fast now. They may indeed pick up, but we may even see some of these historical adoption curves shrink. So if it took 30 years to move AI, we may see this happen in less time. Anyway, let's pick up on a point that I think you made, Anisha, and that was about what happens when we connect more and more things in terms of vulnerability. So one of the touted capabilities of 5G is massive connectivity of devices. Many, many more devices in the environment that could be connected in addition to people. What are the implications from a cybersecurity point of view? Are manufacturers going to have to really up their game in cybersecurity, a paradigm shift in cybersecurity along with a paradigm shift that 5G represents?
To an extent, I think so, because going back to Reed's point, manufacturing is not spearheading the adoption of the technology. So they always base the decisions on lessons learned from the industry already. But that being said, I think from a network security and data security perspective, yes. And I think I'm going to kind of bring it all together. This is the reason why the skill sets are going to be important, because the way you design your processes is going to be important. The way you're strategizing how your data is going to work within this hyper-connected world is going to be important, because I think we need to design in the security aspect of it. It's no longer, this is our IT/OT convergence versus this is our risk management strategy. And I think when we talk about hyperconnectivity, we're not just talking about hyperconnectivity from a network or devices or data perspective. We're talking about hyperconnectivity in how you strategize the functions, the operations within a factory floor or whatever that ecosystem is. And especially when we talk about near-time, real-time data, we have to now put our thinking caps on, because it's no longer, we don't have latency issues. So we're not looking at data which was 5 minutes old or 5 days old or 5 months old. We might be looking at data that it's happening right now, and you're updating those points at this point in time. So from a risk management and cybersecurity perspective, the old risk management models are not going to work.
Very interesting. So Reed or Samir, to Anisha's point about designing in the security from the get-go, do we really even know what the security models need to be with 5G? Reed, you wanted to?
Well, yeah. So there's a chart that sort of highlights, I think, the points that we're talking about here. In the past, security, I would say, has been more of an afterthought for manufacturers, especially if you look at something like IT/OT convergence. That's securing the legacy OT systems is by far the #1 challenge that they run into. And I think it can be tied back to the skill set piece that you've been talking about, Anisha. And I think it highlights here, this is a question around sort of what expertise would you like to see? This is from an IoT standpoint, but there is sort of the connection from a 5G standpoint. Where would you like to see vendors and service providers improve? And you can see the top one, security, data privacy is right there. These are skill sets that manufacturers lack, and they need help on designing security into these things from the get-go. I think that's really the key thing that we're seeing is manufacturers are looking for help. They realize as more and more gets connected, security becomes more and more of an issue. But they're looking for help on sort of how to do that.
And just to add to Reed's point, it goes both ways. Are you operating the 5G networks, or are you consuming 5G networks? Because then the security aspects are different for both, and you might be doing both.
Yeah, I think
it's a
that
major
point.
issue. Yeah.
Sorry, David. Just to conclude, I think on the 2 points that you made, the whole 5G, the private 5G network that's now being increasingly adopted by a lot of large auto OEMs, that is also posing the threat. Like, are you a user? Are you consuming? Are you deploying? From that standpoint, you're opening this up to multiple ecosystem of suppliers, which have an access through not only the private 5G but the complete public 5G network interface. That is further bringing in the whole concerns of security, and I think that needs to be addressed.
Yeah, it's a big parallel issue with all of this that we're all going to have to grapple with. But let's go to our kind of next question area, which I think is really important because all of our survey work here at the NAM clearly shows that one of the biggest issues that manufacturers identify, and it's no surprise to anybody, is the workforce issue. We've got 855,000 open jobs in U.S. manufacturing at present. It's almost a record. That record was set in July when we hit about 950,000. And so manufacturers are having a really hard time finding people and retaining people. Do you think 5G? We've discussed the competitive side. I think we're all in agreement that 5G is absolutely necessary to remain competitive. But do you think 5G also will be important to attracting that next generation? Are they going to expect it when they walk in the door for a job interview? Reed, would you like to take that first?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, David, you mentioned the study that you did, or that studies you've done on the talent piece. We have as well. We just got it back, and there's a chart that sort of shows some of this. But I think so. Obviously, sort of the talent, the skills gap has been talked about for years within manufacturing. If you look at the results, it's a little over 40% say they're currently understaffed. I think COVID has accelerated a lot of this talent and staffing issue. We've spoken to countless manufacturers that have said sort of furloughed workers haven't come back as operations started ramping back up. And in this survey, we asked sort of around it, and it was on average about 5% drop in the workforce across the board. But I think the big issue that so many of these manufacturers are running into is attracting talent. And I think the legacy nature, the outdated nature of a lot of these facilities and the tools that are in use are a big part of it. You can see the quote from this survey of just, a VP of security just running into issues attracting talent because of the tools that are in place. I think it's a big issue, and something, I wouldn't say it's 5G specific, but I think 5G is one of the many sort of digital technology or tools that a younger workforce expects to be in place, because these are things that they're using in their sort of day-to-day life. I can give you countless examples of, especially my first week starting out sort of on the plant floor and being in shock at some of the things that was being done from a post-it note perspective or writing things down in notebooks. But I think the impact that technology will have in attracting the younger workforce is a really important piece that companies should consider, because it absolutely plays a part in attracting qualified applicants.
Yeah. Anisha and Samir, would you agree with this? Any comment, Anisha?
Always. I think I very thoroughly believe in talent management. I think it's about the right skill set, and we are already having. We talked about, the question was about younger generation. I think it's more about the skill set. The younger workforce is just more comfortable with technology and the change because they've been born in a world where the technology is changing all the time. And I think this is where the firms need to realize it's not just about attract and retain. How are we providing the right tools and services to our workforce to enable the right kind of operational technology? So Yeah, augment your workforce with virtual workforce. They should not be doing copy paste jobs. If you hire them for a specific skill set, if you hire them to create predictive models, you make them make predictive models instead of doing copy paste. That's what
Yeah.
the bots are for. So
Yeah. Yeah, it's all about the image. It's all about the environment. We had a
mhm.
session 2 weeks ago where a representative from a Midwest manufacturing company brought up something that I would never have thought of that they had to do to make themselves better attract talent. They said on the call that they had to replace their sign on the highway because it looked like it was something from the 1950s, and they put up a digital sign. And they've also found that applicants were coming in and they were getting turned off to the factory environment, so they had to renovate their bathrooms
Yeah,
and their cafeteria to make them look like they were modern, and it helped them. But who would
yeah.
ever have thought of that? You know, there's so many things that we have to do to do this. Um, let's take our final question and kind of do a little bit of a lightning round on this one if we can. And it's the idea, the question about, you know, when you look forward over the next 5 years, we're all thinking about what the factory of the future is going to look like, what a smart factory will look like, whether it's going to be autonomous, it's going to be highly digitized, we know. Whether it's going to be truly autonomous is up for debate, and how machines are going to run. Um, do you believe 5G has the potential to help realize the factory of the future? Is it fundamental to our vision, whatever that vision may be? Um, let's start with you, Anisha, and then we'll go around the table.
I think it is a distinction that you can leverage. I don't think it's fundamental to creating a smart factory, but if you want to get to the next level of hyperconnectivity and optimize your operations, yes.
Okay, Samir, fundamental or not?
I would say, let me, we talked about multiple use cases, David, already. So one of the massive areas that's on the CEO agenda is sustainability, right, for majority of the manufacturers. So again, looking at the applications around carbon footprint, likes of air quality emission monitoring, whole smart building, space optimization, these are, having a massive impact on the increased adoption. So I would say, if not fundamental, it's there to have an increased potential in the years to come.
Okay, Reed, you've got the last word.
I think so. I think it depends. Smart factory, I wouldn't say necessarily, but I think that last word is the key piece I look at. The autonomous piece, autonomous operations. I think that's really would be the key sort of difference there. I think to have that, that's where 5G really is going to play a role. I mean, obviously, smart manufacturing issues have been, in place and built for years, but autonomous operations, which is more of sort of the final maturity stage when it comes to sort of using data in the decision-making process, I think that's where 5G really is, that transformative piece.
Yeah. Well, we shall see. Most of our surveys at this point, the manufacturers are saying that people will still be necessary, even in kind of a semi-autonomous kind of construction for factories and plants. And certainly we were going to need that. So let's open it up to our audience for questions. Not sure anything's come in on the chat. Lauren, do we have anything that's come in, or can we open it up to the floor and take questions orally?
We cannot open it up to the floor. I apologize for that, but we do have a good amount of questions that came in, and thank you to everybody that submitted them. We will certainly not be able to get to them all based on timing, so you will get your questions answered with a follow-up. So we do appreciate that. But I'm going to take one that came in a little earlier today, and it's a longer question, so give me just a moment. But do you advocate for a pure 5G connectivity model in plants versus a mix of Wi-Fi and 5G? And how do you recommend that we're able to meet the challenges of finding 5G capable manufacturing equipment? There's a little parentheses here. Considering product lifestyles for manufacturing equipment are much longer than those of traditional front office network devices like laptops and mobile phones.
Okay, that's a big question. Who'd like to take a shot at that one?
Yeah, maybe I
Samir?
can just start off and I think request my colleagues to add. So the whole, you have brought in a very important question of the legacy being addressed in the whole aspect of 5G disruption. And I think we talked briefly about this, why manufacturers are hesitant, what's the challenge in the whole implementation. So looking at 2-3 aspects. So one is the entire legacy applications, other is the whole lot of investments. And that's why earlier I mentioned the IT/OT integration as one of the key areas and the use case as well, right? So that's where it begins. If we talk about, as David brought about, what's going to happen in the next future 5-10 years from now, but unless we solve this problem of the entire IT/OT integration, it's going to be a challenge. So I believe that's where manufacturers will look at A, the low-hanging fruits, and B, solving again. It cannot be seen in isolation. In my view, looking at the business strategy, looking at complete operations impact that this 5G technology is bringing in, and the again business use case on ROI. These are the 3 factors which will define our steps. And to sum it all, take small steps, get there, see the ROI, and move to the next scalability. I think that's the key. I don't know.
Okay,
Partially,
thank you. Thank you
but
for that. We've got about 3 minutes left. See if we can get a couple more questions in, Lauren.
I have some very technical questions, so let me.
Okay.
I'm going to skip those for now, and we'll get those followed up on. But I'll go with this one. How are other manufacturers building IIoT capabilities on top of existing assets without resulting in massive downtime?
Okay. Hands up on that one. Anybody?
maybe I can give
Samir?
it a shot. Yeah. So what IIoT and the whole downtime impact. Now, sometimes you have to look at capturing the data from places you were not thinking about earlier. So that's the first change that is coming in. When you want to do what you want to do is a machine can go in self-healing process, the whole automatically correction process. For that, the entire video analytics and the AI is primarily bringing in the disruption out there. I remember a case of a Japanese beverage manufacturer that was primarily looking at similar situation. They wanted to look at, without stopping the operations, without the downtime, how can I implement a complete monitoring on and reducing 5 error defects that were identified earlier in the process. So they brought in this real-time video analytics, close to about 10 fps on edge for detecting the errors, and they really achieved it. So there was almost nearly 99.9% achievement in terms of the entire defect error identification. So I believe these are some of the areas one can look at in terms of defining IIoT use case without any downtime disruption.
Yeah,
I think
yeah. One thing, I think the video piece is interesting. We're seeing a similar sort of shift or focus there. That every year we do sort of Futurescape, which looks at sort of future predictions. In the 6 months since we published it, we've already had to pull up some of our predictions around sort of those video-based systems. So it's definitely a growing focus area that we're seeing as well.
Okay. Well, we got time for one. Since we started at 11:01, we have time for one more, Lauren. One quick one.
I'm pretty sure there's nothing quick about any of the questions I have here, but I'll throw a different one out there. Let's go back to the workforce side. And aside from costs, what about the human resources needed to design, integrate, and support? Do you really think there's enough talent in the labor market to support? So kind of going back to that whole discussion.
This sounds like one for Anisha.
yeah, so I do think that yes, there is the talent in the market, but I think we need to change our mindset also. Yes, there is a talent in the market. Yes, everybody knows what the talent market looks like in the industry right now. I think the other way to look at it is also, how can you create that talent in-house, right? You don't have to depend on outside talent, and this is where investments in L&D, investments in how you, like, what is your career projection for certain roles is important to look at. So I think you need to broaden the perspective of what's out there in the market versus what else can we actually develop.
Yeah, grow your own. Good message. I think we're going to have to wrap it up, folks. Lauren, any final slides for the audience?
We do have a few if you want to run through them.
I'll run through them very quickly. There are additional resources on this subject that you can avail yourself of, audience. So look at that slide. We will be sending out an email with links to these. Next. Our upcoming MLC plant tours. Intertape Polymer Group is just about a month away, and we've got a full schedule of plant tours, live and in person, going through the rest of the year. So please mark your calendars on that. If you need more information, contact us at MLC. Next. And finally, the 18th Annual Manufacturing Leadership Rethink Conference will take place at the end of June, where we'll be discussing, I'm sure, this topic again, as well as many topics related to M4.0. With that, let me thank Reed Paquin, Anisha Biggers, and Samir Joshi both from NTT Data for being part of our panel. Really appreciate all your insights on this subject. And thank you, audience, for attending. I'm David Brosell. Have a great day. We'll see you at another MLC event in the near future, I'm sure. Bye-bye and have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.